Alright, so I have the lovely job tonight of introducing our speakers, and I'm sure everyone already knows all about them, but I'm going to try to do them justice. And so Sara Wachter-Boettcher and Katel LeDû are the co-founders of Strong Feelings podcast, of course, new iteration. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about their background if you don't know them already. So Sara is a Philly-based content strategist, user experience designer who's been working on the web since 2005. She's a principal at Rare Union, and she's facilitated many projects from content strategy, CMS migrations, for Fortune 100 companies, education, research institutions, and startups. She's presented previously for Content Strategy Philly on her book, Technically Wrong, Sexist Apps, Bias Actors, and Other Threats of Toxic Tech. She's also led workshops and has co-authored Design for Real Life, and has written in many famous publications. So. And a part of that, Katel, CEO of A Book Apart, which I think there might be some books.
Oh, we have giveaways.
Yes, some giveaways here tonight. From being that she's The Book Apart's a beloved indie publisher. They write books on pretty much all our areas of the world where we geek out, from design, people who write code, writers, and content strategy. Many books there. You'll probably find them around our office if you'd like more examples. And before running A Book Apart, Katel is the National Geographic's digital director of photography. So I wanted to thank them so much.
Heavy hitters.
Yes. So much for coming tonight, talking about the Strong Feelings podcast, about their work, the podcast about work, feminism, and friendship. And thank you so much for coming tonight. We're so excited to have you. Thank you.
All right. I probably don't need to be mic'd up, but I'll kind of save my voice a little bit this way. Thank you all for coming out tonight. So yeah, I mean, Katel and I work in the kind of design and content and UX space, tech space all the time, but tonight we're going to be talking about something a little bit different, because we're going to be talking a lot about, obviously, our podcast, and specifically what we're going to talk about tonight is sort of growing a podcast as a side project, how to balance side projects with everything else that's happening in your life, and sort of what it looks like behind the scenes to get something out the door. So we're going to kind of start out talking a little bit about our show. How many people here have actually listened to our show before? Nice, a few people. Yeah, a good chunk of people. And I'm sure some of you here are here because you're interested in podcasting. I'm sure some others are here because you're like, I don't know, design, UX, content strategy, that sounds like what I do. All valid reasons to be here. I hope that whatever has brought you here tonight, that you get something out of this talk today. We are also going to have some time after we do our talk where we are going to have a little bit of audience participation. Hopefully it'll be very fun and not painful, because part of that is that we have some giveaways. So we mentioned, Katel runs a publishing company. She has books. I've written books. I got books. We have books. We have a bunch of copies of some books of mine and some books from Katel's company. We also have stickers in the back. Did anybody see the stickers yet? If you did not see the stickers, they're on the table with the pizza. Make sure you get one before you go. You can also sign up for our newsletter back there. We will pass that up around a sign-up sheet for that. We have an edition of the newsletter coming out tomorrow. It's pretty good, actually. So if you want to get that, make sure you get your name on the list. We promise not to spam you. Literally, we only send you the newsletter. Okay, with that in mind, let's talk about this. Okay, so what the heck is strong feelings? Besides something I have a lot. All right. So the show is really about best friends and business partners. Katel and I are starting to do a lot of work together too. We talk about all the things that are on our mind, particularly when it comes to sort of a feminist perspective on work. And sort of what's it like to deal with your work life as a person who's also trying to make sense of everything happening in the world and all of the weird biases and toxic cultures that you might encounter. And we bring on guests all the time who want to talk about that same stuff too. So I'm gonna play for you, and Katel and I are gonna stand here super awkwardly while we do it. I'm gonna play for you just a quick trailer. It'll feel very long for me to have to listen to our voices while we stand and wait, but hopefully it will give you a good feel for what the show is all about.
Do you have strong feelings? I sure do. My name is Sara Wachter-Boettcher, and I'm here with my best friend, Katel LeDû.
Hey y'all!
We're the hosts of Strong Feelings, a podcast about work, feminism, and friendship.
Every week we talk about the stuff that really matters, like unfucking your work life or taking better care of your brain and body than just swigging wine and smearing on another face mask.
Wait, I can still do that sometimes though, right?
Totally, but you have to invite me.
Okay, deal. We will also be talking about all the ways we're confronting our own bullshit, like how we're unlearning body shame or breaking out of the comfort of white feminism.
And you'll hear intimate conversations with authors, artists, activists, and entrepreneurs. We'll ask them why they do what they do and what happens when it gets hard.
So check out Strong Feelings, your weekly dose of fun feminist real talk with the best friends you didn't know you were missing. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or check us out at strongfeelings.co, because life's too short to bottle things up.
All right, so that's what the show is about, right? And so hopefully some of you want to check it out afterwards, but tonight we're really going to talk about like how does it actually come together. You may have noticed in that trailer I mentioned weekly. Do you know how often that is? Turns out it's a lot. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like, and weekly with some breaks, to be fair. But what that looks like, so how do you actually do that as a side project? What does that look like building that from the ground up, building an audience, scaling it, sort of what happens if you start getting momentum for your side project? And then what do you need to do to kind of work with people? I think one of the biggest things that we realized was that, hey, actually we work pretty well together, but also that takes work, right? Especially because Katel runs a company and I run a company, which means that like, oh, and neither of those companies are this, right? So that means that we have to kind of do a lot of juggling to make it happen. So we're gonna talk about those things. All right. So first up, starting a podcast. How did we start and what did we do? No.
So we started as a show called Know You Go, and right around the end of 2017, another friend of ours, Jenn Lukas, and Sara and I were all like sitting around at her house having some wine, and we had previously talked about like maybe starting a podcast, and then decided like let's just go for it, and we were getting really excited about it because we wanted to share conversations we had had with each other and with other women and with just other people about ambition and navigating our careers. And we got so excited, I was like, we were talking over each other and I was like, no, you go. And Jen was like, oh my gosh, I think that's it. And so it started out as Know You Go. And we were so excited about this podcast that we even though we were excited, we had no idea what we were gonna do with it.
And so when we first started the show, we were ambitious about it. We put a schedule together. We were interviewing people, but it was like very much like, are people going to listen to this, right? But then something happened. And the thing that happened was that we got listed on like the new and noteworthy in Apple Podcasts, which is where still like a huge percentage of people listen to their podcasts. And all of a sudden we were getting all this email. I mean, all this, look, we're not serial, okay? But we started getting all of these emails from people, right? And we were getting like, every day we were getting these emails, particularly when we were in New and Noteworthy, where people were like, I feel like these are the kinds of things that have been batting around in my head and I don't have anybody to talk about them with. And we were like, gosh, maybe there's like more here than we realized. Maybe there's a bigger opportunity here. Like, we want to see where this goes, right? And so we were like, okay, we are really going to push on this and say like, we are definitely going to do this thing. Sometimes though, things don't exactly go as planned.
Yeah, just as we were sort of like really starting to feel our groove, things completely changed because Jen left the show in the middle of last year. And so Sara and I sort of found ourselves talking about like, were we going to continue doing the show? What would it look like? Should we get a new host? Should we just do it the two of us? And we kind of used that as a way and as a point to kind of like figure out what we really wanted the show to be.
And I think, you know, it's easy to say, like, I wish we'd done that from the very beginning, but of course you're starting something as a side project, you're starting something like after you've had a glass of wine with your friends, you're not necessarily saying, like, now let's sit down and do the strategy, right? But one of the things that really prompted us to do was sit down and think about like, why are we here and what are we doing? And so like my sort of content strategy background kicked in very hard. And I was like, okay, what does this actually mean? And so we sat down, we really thought about, if we're gonna keep doing this, we think we have something that has resonated with people. What have people been saying to us? What kind of messages have we gotten from them? Like, what are the parts of this that are really working? And also what matters to us, right? Because, I mean, as a side project, this has to be something that we have to feel really good and excited about. And it has to be, I mean, like if you're gonna work on a side project, right? You have to find something that you feel matters for some reason, or that like checks some internal box for you, right? So for us, what we came up with was a few things, and we started sort of articulating these more clearly. And what we found was that this was really helpful. That I think that this doesn't often happen in side projects. It's really easy to kind of like launch something and just kind of go with it and see where it evolves, which is great. But this kind of, it forced us to reflect. And while that was like tough to kind of be like, oh wait, we were 3 and now we're not, I'm really glad we had that moment to reflect. And so what we did is we kind of talked about, okay, well what matters to us a lot, right? One of the biggest things was we wanted people to feel less alone by listening to the show, because we found over and over again in the emails we were getting, it was people saying stuff like, you know, I've had that exact same problem with like, you know, like the creepy boss guy or whatever, right? Like I've had these same problems at my work and I didn't realize other people kind of were thinking about the same stuff as me. And so we thought, you know, if that is something we can do for our listeners, like that is huge, that is important. We also really thought from the very beginning, one of the things we talked a lot about was like, okay, it would be easy enough to pull from the networks that we have, highlight people who work in tech and design and sort of like related spaces, and we would have a lot of cool and interesting guests. But we also said, you know what, we need to make sure that we're hearing from people who are different from us and people who are outside of our networks and outside the networks of our listeners. And so we definitely talk all the time about like, what are the perspectives we're bringing on, or the backgrounds we're bringing on. We typically focus on guests who are women or non-binary. We don't tend to have, well, we've literally never had a man on the show, but it's possible, theoretically possible. But specifically, like our mission is really around highlighting voices that we hear less of and highlighting women's voices. And so that's a focus area. But within that, there's so much diversity that can easily like not happen if we rely too heavily on the people we already know. So we talk about that a lot. And that's actually something that we hear a lot from people is like, oh, I wouldn't have known about this topic, this issue. It would have never occurred to me that this was a problem if I didn't hear it from this person who I didn't know about. So we were like, okay, that's central, right? Like we can never stray from that, because if we stray from that, like we're not fulfilling what we think is important here. We also really wanted to think a lot about inclusivity of the show in a lot of ways. We want to make sure that it is a show where we are thinking very like inclusive of different perspectives and inclusive of different experiences, but also, you know, we have a segment of our show called the Fuck Yeah of the Week. We definitely have a good amount of swearing on the show. I tone that down in certain circumstances, but on the show we decided like, we don't really water things down. And that's not just about swearing, but it's also about being really upfront about sort of like how we feel about things, where we stand politically, like that stuff is on the table for the show. So we want to be inclusive, but like, the purpose of the show isn't necessarily to bring it to like this sort of bland, neutral stance. It's not about being neutral at all. We talked about this a little bit in our trailer, right? Like facing our own bullshit. That was something we thought about a lot. Like if this show doesn't challenge some of our own perspectives, if this show doesn't make us like realize that people are out there who feel very differently or see things differently than us, then I don't think we're doing a good enough job. I think, you know, we talked with a guest a little while ago who talks about body image and really like connects body image to racial justice issues in a way that I had never thought about. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is not something I would have anticipated. And this made me question a lot. And that I think was really important for like sort of the personal growth. So being open and vulnerable, that's part of the reason we renamed the show Strong Feelings. One of the things we found was that we think that in our own lives, being open and vulnerable and sort of talking about how we feel and being able to sort of like have those deeper connections with people, we have found that that has been really valuable in terms of us living our lives and having successful careers. Like, I mean, the bio stuff, having somebody read your bio out loud where you stand there is like the worst. The worst. But having somebody read your bio and like, oh yeah, heavy hitters, like, you know, one of the things that I've really realized is that one of the only reasons I'm able to get up and give a talk or write a book or whatever is that I also have people in my life that I can like really talk to about all of the ugly sides of things. And I think for a lot of people, that can be very scary, or we're not necessarily encouraged to do that in a work context. So we thought that it was really valuable to model that so that people would see that and hear that and make that a little bit more normal. And then finally, you know, helping people find joy in their work, right? And what does that look like? Like we consider ourselves pretty ambitious. We want to like start things and lead things and make things. But what does ambition mean? And it can mean so many different things to different people. And so helping people be able to like widen the scope of what ambitiousness could look like, or widen the scope of what their work life could look like, that would be an awesome outcome of the show. And so what we found was that sitting down and doing this, like I said, even though it was a little bit forced, like, oh, hey, hello. Those are my nieces. But they're pretty cool. So what we really found was that going through this process, like I said, like not in the ideal scenario, a process that like we should have been doing anyway, but kind of being pushed to say, what do we really care about? And like, if we're gonna keep doing this, what is the why behind it? I think that was really valuable. So like a huge takeaway for us, and a huge takeaway for any kind of side project you might pursue, is just about saying like, well, what does success look like to you? And what are the values that you have? And like, what are you willing to say no to? We turned down like a sponsorship slot from a show where it was a male and female host, and we'll mention who it was. It was male and female host, and the woman host was actually like relatively famous, and the dude was like a silent partner in your business. But on the show they were doing together, he kept interrupting her and talking over her, and they wanted to run a promo on our show, and I was like, I don't actually feel okay about that. And so I told them straight up, I was like, you know, in theory this sounds like a good, like this show on paper sounds good, but what you've sent us has this guy talking over this woman over and over again, and I'm not comfortable putting that in front of my audience. That was money that I had to, I mean, the podcast does not get us rich, but that was money that I had to say no to, right? And like we had to be, not yet. After tonight, though. But that was something we had to be able to say, like, that's not us. And if we say yes to that at the very beginning, right, really early, if you say yes to that, then suddenly you wake up, you know, a year later, and it's like, what other kind of like diet pills have you said yes to, or something, right? And we are personally against something like diet pills. We would not take advertising for diet pills. We actually did turn down somebody else who's not diet pills, but like kind of in that vein, because we were like, that does not work for us, and like gotta set some boundaries. And I think that if you haven't had these conversations, it's really hard, and you can easily wake up somewhere that you didn't intend to be.
So we're gonna get into a little bit of this, but side projects can be really hard to sustain because basically they're no one's top priority. And so you need a little bit of structure. We have found that a couple things work for us in doing this. Planning seasons, even if it's just internally, so that we kind of like corral, you know, 10 episodes at a time together and then have a little break between them. We've sort of found that like seasons doesn't really mean anything to anybody listening, but for us it's like, okay, we can kind of get our heads around like planning this out, we get guests for this, and then we wrap it up. So that's helped a lot. We absolutely have weekly meetings where we make sure that we're, you know, checking in on progress, on status of things, and we're also just like keeping track of things that are happening, and just like touching base, because we're actually like starting to work with other people now, and it's not just me and Sarah, and so we need to organize that. We also focus on discrete tasks, like guest research or planning sessions, where we book meetings for that, right? Scheduled time can be really like unproductive because you're like, let's just do everything, and then you don't get anything done. So that has been really important to us. Really, you want to just give yourself just enough structure to be accountable and keep things manageable. And that's just, you know, keeping it accountable to each other and keeping it manageable so that you're not like, now I have another job.
Sometimes it does feel like I have another job.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I want to talk a little bit about something that I get a lot of questions about this when I'm chatting with people. It's like, what does it actually cost, or like how do you budget for this sort of thing? Podcasts range from like almost free to extremely expensive, And so like, what does it mean to put a podcast together? I will speak to sort of like what we do as well as some loose ideas about other things you might do. So what does it cost? Well, okay. Again, from what I have seen. We pay for, this is what we pay for. You don't have to pay for all these things. We pay for, per episode, we pay for audio production and we pay for transcription. The reason we pay for transcription, because you don't have to have your podcast transcribed, and most people don't, but we decided coming from the field we come from, accessibility is huge. Our whole audience is not from tech. Most people are gonna listen to the show, but we just decided that is a priority for us, right? Going back to our principles and our values, that's a priority, and so we wanna budget for that first. If there comes a time when we like have no budget, maybe we'll talk about it, but that's like up there right at the top of the list. Audio production, that's a one where I was like, I don't know, you might spend like $100 an episode. We're talking like in that 45 to an hour episode. That's pretty cheap. You can do, you can find people who will do things for any range of money. You could like $25, and you will get some level of editing. And you can find people who, like, if you're like, I want to put together a This American Lifestyle reported episode with like multiple perspectives, like, then you're talking like hundreds of hours. And so all of those things are valid. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is like, just like you all work in fields, for the most part you work in fields where you have some concept that like people with these specialized skills, just like a designer, they cost money and their time is valuable. And so you have to think about how much you really need. For us, you know, we're hiring somebody who has, like, this is her entire business, is doing audio production, and she is doing a few different things, right? So she's doing both the kind of like, here's all of our files, do something, like stitch them together, clean them up, but she's taking, okay, multiple tracks from us, multiple tracks from interviewees and us, right? So it's like there's me and Katel segments, there's us with an interviewee, there's sponsors, there's you know, music, whatever. Like she's taking all of that. She's got to smooth and level it out. But there's also the editorial piece of like cutting down a 45-minute interview to a 30-minute interview. And we give feedback on that because we are like editorial people. We have a lot of like opinions, right? I have a lot of content opinions, but I don't do the audio production. So like part of it is we give her some feedback, like looser notes, and she goes through and she really thinks about things like that answer kind of dragged. And we could actually tighten it up if we cut directly from A to C, right? And those kinds of things, like, that takes brain power, that takes time, that takes a little bit of finesse to do that well, beyond just the leveling out the voices so that you don't have, like, weird mic stuff happening. So you gotta pay for that. Again, you can find stuff that's gonna be very cheap, you can find stuff that's gonna be very expensive. I have heard a wild range of hourly rates, anywhere from, like, $25 an hour to $150 an hour. So like design also, it's very similar to talking about design where it's like, what does design cost per hour? Whew. So it depends. So a big thing I would say is like, if this is something you need to do audio production, you really want to kind of put some feelers out and kind of figure out like, where are you at? Are you really looking for really baseline stuff? You want to get started, you're gonna do it cheap. Are you just trying to go from like doing it yourself to getting a tiny bit of help? Or is this something that really needs to be high polish and like get a sense of like where in that big universe you might be before you go out and like, otherwise you're not gonna be able to even compare people apple to apple, you know? The other stuff we pay for monthly, we pay for a few things. Simplecast, hosting, like you have to put files somewhere. You can theoretically self-host them, but most people put them on a podcast host, it's a lot easier. Zencaster, which we use because we have interviewees who are in random places. So it allows you to have basically like, it's kind of like having a Google Hangout, but it records everybody on a separate track. So you have clean tracks of my voice, clean tracks of their voice, and clean tracks of Katel's voice. And then we also pay for, you know, a little bit for website hosting. I don't know, $5. I have no idea how much it actually costs. It's on an annual plan. When you have like a lot of websites, how much does hosting cost? And then we have a G Suite email address because we want it to sound legit. So we don't have a Gmail account, so we pay for that. You don't have to pay for a lot of those things, but those are the kinds of things that we decided mattered to us based off of what we were doing. So where do we like get money though? Okay, there's a few models that tend to happen for podcasting. Sponsorship and advertising is the stuff you like probably comes to mind the most, like, you know, mattress ads, right? Yeah, Blue Apron, all of that stuff, right? All of those things that you might hear, stamps.com. All of that stuff is usually on like a CPM model, usually, which is meaning like per 1,000 listeners you have, you pay X dollar amount for the spot. So you have to have an audience, you kind of measure the audience. Podcast metrics are a whole weird thing, but those are usually more sold like advertising, right? Underwriting's a little different. Underwriting is more like somebody just decides to support your show for a year or a season or whatever, a series of episodes. That's actually what we have right now is sort of underwriting, which is to say we have a major sponsor called Harvest, the time tracking software. They're awesome and they like what we do. They think that what we're doing is important, and so they're supporting us for the season. They are not making us wealthy, but that we can pay the bills, and for us, that's a better fit for this, like for like a baseline than trying to like fill those little slots, which are a lot more like wheeling and dealing with ad people, and require you to like really prove all of your metrics versus they're like, we think this is important, right? There's also people who do it all via like Patreons and things like that. Listener drives, those can be really great for getting a little bit of money. Those can be hard to sustain. Like if you're talking about, you know, we're doing an episode a week and we're paying for somebody to transcribe it and we're paying for somebody to produce it every time, like that adds up. So you gotta really have committed listeners. We have not explored it yet because the people I've seen who've done Patreons, it didn't look like it would compare to what we are doing. We might do it in the future. If you're doing something that has a little bit more of a public service angle though, there are grants you can get to put together a podcast series. We learned a lot about that at a conference called Work It, which is the conference for women in podcasting, and they have some materials online. So if you're doing something that's sort of like investigative journalism, you might be able to actually get a grant to fund like the real reporting on it, which is pretty rad, but probably not the kind of thing they would award to like
Strong feelings.
Strong feelings. 6-figure grant? Yeah, why not? We're worth it. All right. So one of the big challenges is that. Oh, we're gonna have questions later. One of the big challenges is, of course, like generally speaking, this is not always true. Generally speaking, like advertisers want to know that you have an audience that they want to reach, and if you are a new show, you literally do not have an audience. You have maybe the potential of an audience. Maybe you have like personal profiles that are popular, right? But you do not have an audience. So like, what do you do? Well, one of the reasons we were able to get Harvest interested in us, and we had a couple other sponsors last year, like Shopify, was that we just went and worked the people we know. We said like, okay, given the work that we've already done, what are the organizations that we think might be interested in this? We are not really doing like a women in tech podcast per se. We have women who are coming from technology on the show a lot, but not all the time. We talk about subjects related to our work, but it's not really about like tech. Nevertheless, we've got a lot of people who really want to see more women in leadership in technology, more visible women in technology, and who thought that like supporting women doing this made a lot of sense. So we definitely were very upfront about exactly what we're doing with the show, but for some organizations, they're like, that fits in with our mission of women in tech, cool. Turns out tech organizations also have money. So that's like, okay, that made it really helpful for us. That might not be true for everybody, but for us, like we were looking at it as saying like, who is in our network already that is the most likely to have this resonate with them and that has some money that they could put toward it? And then where there's value to them, right? Where it's like being connected with us is a valuable thing for them because it positions them for reasons that are valuable. We use things like okay, like, I don't know, like I've written books or like we have Twitter followings, whatever. We use that kind of stuff also as some backing to be able to say like, we have an audience for ourselves already and this is an audience we can build. The other thing we had to do was also just get over the horrifying reality of sending emails to strangers, which is not my favorite thing. If you like doing that sort of thing, if you like pitching people and being like, hey, we're starting this show, can you give us money? Bless you. That for me, I find like, it makes me go into a shame spiral very quickly. And so it was like, we had to like get to do it together and kind of be like, okay, it's okay, what we're doing is okay. We are allowed to do this, and like work your way out of that particular shame spiral of being like, how can I ask somebody for money for my thing? So we did that. That was one of the hardest parts, but it worked really well for us and got us to a place where we're feeling really stable with the show. We feel like now we have that foundation we can really like work on growing the show from without worrying about being like, oh my God, how are we gonna keep it alive, you know? So, you don't have to have a side project or a podcast that's out there to make money. You don't have to be trying to turn a profit. You maybe don't need sponsors at all, but I think you really do want to think about like, what are you willing to spend? And for a lot of people, it might be in support of their business. And if it's in support of your business, it's fine to make it like a cost center, right? You're like, okay, this is something I do to market my business. Awesome. But how much is going to be viable there? And also, how do you know if that's successful? Like, are you pouring a lot of time and money into it? And if you start spending, you know, $1,000 a month on your podcast, is that going to be, like, maybe that's short-term sustainable, but is that sustainable forever? That depends. How much money is it, you know, you're making from it? Or like, what's going to come out the other side of it? I think a lot of times it's like easy to get deep in and then realize like, oh wow, this is long-term, this is not very sustainable. And then you have to kind of figure out what you're going to do. So I think kind of asking yourself those questions early on is really helpful.
Also, just like when someone has emailed you asking for something, I mean, granted, maybe it's not like a sponsorship of something, but like a lot of the times you're just like, yeah, I'm gonna consider this. So I don't know, I always think about that too. Like,
If you're the one receiving
yeah,
email,
it's like, you know, it's hard when you're just like coming at it from the other side. So now we're gonna talk a little bit about how we've been scaling this as the year went on last year and where we are now. So we did a lot of things the hard way at first, which was alone, or at least it felt that way. In the very beginning, we reached out to, you know, a few people here and there, but we sort of did it more reactively instead of proactively. So we kind of did it as we really like needed something or got into a sticky situation. We weren't really like looking for folks to like show us how they were doing things. And we really didn't seek out a community or like kind of mentors. And I honestly don't think we really realized that that was available to us. And we realized that we needed that later on. So when things went wrong, for example, like we started seeing that our numbers, our listener numbers were really wacky with the hosting provider that we were using. We were just like, what do we do? Like we have no idea who to ask. We have no idea where to start. And we would just kind of like Google for answers a lot, and sometimes we came up with a good solution, and a lot of times we didn't. And so we sort of felt alone, and we didn't even realize it until a little later on. So we went to, as Sara mentioned, we went to this podcast festival called Work It last fall. It's a women's podcast festival, and it was really amazing. But one of the things that we really wanted to do when we went there was to network. We were like, okay, great, we're gonna see a bunch of sessions, we're gonna like meet a bunch of cool people, but we really want to like talk to people, see what their experience has been like, hopefully share ours and learn that way. But we were really nervous. Like, I don't know if you can tell, but like, this is like not my favorite thing to do. I don't like speaking, I don't like, it's just like very nerve-wracking. But we did it. We like went up to people, we started conversations, we even like signed up for mentor sessions, and that was so awesome. We got a lot out of it. And what we learned was that we were a lot farther along than we thought we were in a lot of ways. And that was so reassuring because we were like, okay, we're not like totally way off base. It also let us know where we wanted to improve on things and like where we really needed to focus, like getting more involved with the community and just like looking for where we really wanted to invest time. And it also gave us valuable connections, like just by starting some conversations at like the happy hour, or as a side conversation to one of the mentor sessions, somebody introduced us to someone else, and we got a contact at Stitcher. We also got a recommendation for a new hosting provider, which was really awesome because we really needed that. So there are obviously a lot of ways you can do that, build community and like find networks. Going to meetups is a great way to do that, going to conferences and festivals, and just like, putting your foot out there, putting yourself out there a little bit and reaching out to podcasters that you like. When we started just asking folks, a lot of them were really kind and would talk to us, and we were like, oh, okay, this is awesome. Like, we're doing the same thing. Like, this is all right. And we still want to talk to other podcasters who are huge and big names, like, to call your girlfriend, ladies, and like one day, we know that like we're not going to be able to do that unless we just ask. And then also finding communities that suit, what you're doing with your show. And these are a few of the ones that we've been really interested in being a part of. The end point is basically other people have done this before, learn from them, and make friends with them, for sure.
All right, so we can talk a little bit about audience growth, how do you get people to listen? Which is a great question that if anybody has one final answer to, that'd be awesome for me. But what we found was that, there's really you gotta put in some time. You gotta figure out your message, you gotta put in some time. And usually it might not take some money, but depending on how you want to grow, just like scaling anything else, you might need to put some money into it if you want to sort of get out to bigger audiences. Sometimes you need to get some help. So for us, one of the things we decided was we want to project out there to the world that we are serious about what we're doing. That was as we, something actually we realized, after working on the show for a while as Know You Go, one of the things we realized was this takes too much time to do it half-assed. Right, where you're if we try to dabble, then we're gonna have to quit because it's too much time for something that you're just dabbling in. And so either we need to basically scale back or commit, right? And so, both either could be a right answer, but for us, we said the right answer was we're gonna commit to this and see what happens. So, if you want to project that you're serious, you gotta do some things that make you look a little more serious. So we did a few things. We put together a lot of different kinds of materials. So we did we did some logo work, we got some stuff designed, we basically worked our networks, which is the #1 thing I recommend for everything because you can trade stuff with people. You have just generally goodwill you built up with people who are oh my God, I would love to do that for you, right? So logo design work, we worked on key messages and themes, we actually put together stuff we could share with people and say this is what our show is about. I'm gonna share an example of that. We did a little photo shoot, so we had photos of us that could position us in the way looking at we look at all of the other podcasts, the podcasts that are big and have live shows and big audiences and okay, well, what kind of what is the image that they're projecting and kind of say, okay, how can we do that? We got a little bit of PR help, just a little kind of smidge of some PR help, reach out to some media organizations, put together a sponsor kit, because if you're a legit podcast, you have that sponsor deck, you just email out the PDF. Doing things like a trailer, like we played earlier. Doing a lot of stuff having another promo, a version of our promo that we can swap with other shows that we think have audiences that might be interested. So swapping, so we play theirs in the middle of our show, they play ours in the middle of their show, that kind of stuff. And then we've also been doing a lot of writing. So working with some podcast publications like Radio Public, writing stuff on Medium. All kinds of things to get it out there. And then also doing events like this, which obviously we want to, encourage more people to do side projects and podcasts. And also we'd love more of you to come tonight to listen to our show. If 0 people came tonight and never checked out our show, that would make me sad. It would make me very sad. So we're doing lots of stuff, right? And so when I said things like we're putting together, messaging, things like that, we just did it in a Google Doc. It wasn't formal, but we had something we could point to and we could say, these are the themes for the season, right? We said on the agenda for the season is unfucking your work life, trading self-care for true self-love, putting faith in friendships, facing your own bullshit. So we were sort of organizing it so that somebody could look at that and be oh, I see what you're about. I see what the themes are, right? That was really helpful for getting people to just sort of take us seriously because there's a zillion podcasts, and if you want people to think that you're a real one versus a dabbling one, you kind of have to, play that role. There's also a lot of stuff we do every time we have an episode come out. We had our first episode of the season, first of the year, came out today. We do a lot of things and trying to figure out how to do more of them without spending all of our time. But we have a Medium publication, which basically we duplicate the stuff that's on the website so that Medium sometimes has more discoverability. So you have sort of all of the episodes are available there. We also follow up with guests when they're going to come on, when their show is actually live, and try to get them to promote the show. The more popular your guest is, the more they can help you. We really put our time into the social media sites where we're personally active. We obviously for example, Facebook. We're not Facebook users. I particularly hate Facebook. But we have a site, we have a Facebook page, stuff goes there, but realistically, if you had endless time, we'd probably spend more time there. But realistically, the stuff that works the best is the stuff that we are most personally connected to, because that's where our networks are strong. So we invest more time where we feel like we can get a lot out of it. And then we do a bi-weekly newsletter. It's called I Love That, and like I said, it's pretty fun. But what we do is we remind people of recent shows. We also highlight a lot of new people in that. So we highlight things that other people wrote. We highlight a person who's doing something interesting every single time. And doing that too is sort of a way where we want to make sure we're allowing people to learn about new people, and then those new people that we feature oftentimes become sort of fans of ours who share our stuff. And then also audience feedback. So in addition to trying to get people to listen, it's also important to listen to them. And it also makes people feel really included. So we did a little survey at the end of 2018, which was awesome. It was just like, Google Forms. It was really easy to do. There's a couple excerpted questions. We focused on open-ended feedback because we were like, look, we're not gonna get 20,000 responses to sort through, right? We're gonna get a manageable amount of stuff to sort through, and what we really wanted was rich information. So we had a few questions about like demographics. Sponsors really wanted to know that kind of stuff, so we asked a little bit. We made all that optional, which I strongly recommend. Like if you're asking people about gender and age and race, let them answer free form, let them answer how they want, and then don't make them answer that information. But what we really wanted was things like, what do you love about it and what can we do better on? What are topics you want us to explore? Are there guests that you would like us to have? And then also things like sponsors, like are there sponsors or ads that you think would be great for us? And also, is there stuff that you hope we never sell, like diet pills? And what was awesome about it, okay, so we got things like, I think like 40 or something, maybe more, 50 recommendations for guests, some of whom were like, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. I was like, she seems busy. I mean, like,
Yes.
if you know her and can get her on our show, like, yeah, but some of them were like unrealistic, right? Some of them were people who were like pretty well known that we'd actually like tried or like maybe. And some were people who were like, oh, we don't know about them, and like, wow, they seem really great. We also learned a lot of good and some not so good things. And one of the most important things we learned was like, this kind of feedback, like I'm having the best chat with friends, you find guests who have unique stories and voices, hearing tidbits about your life and careers that we don't talk about as a society, like talking about mental health, like that was awesome. Like hearing that's exactly what I want to hear. What was also great was that the stuff that was negative was mostly like smaller stuff, where I was like, okay, yeah, we've screwed up some audio. Okay, or like somebody said, less uptalk. That was you. We talk how we talk. We talk how we talk, and I'm personally fine with it. And if somebody's turned off by us having some uptalk in it, honestly, it's probably not the best show for them. I think that there's a lot of people who are conditioned to judge women's voices very harshly, and to me, I've decided that that's a them problem and not a me problem. But we learned so much from this, and what I really found in all of this was that getting to that place of growth, it's like, yeah, we had to invest the time to be like, hey, listen to our show, like, hey, reach out, but there's also this internal piece where you have to be able to say like, I'm willing to take this feedback, I want to take things to heart, I want to learn from it, and you really have to, be able to internalize it and like, not get defensive about stuff, because people are really trying to help you, actually. Giving feedback is a gift in a lot of ways. I mean, sometimes people are crappy. But when people are giving you honest feedback and they're meaning it from the best perspective, like taking that as a gift. So that was something that I thought was really, really valuable to learn.
Yeah, the first time I listened to like one of our shows, I was like, oh my God, what? Why am I gonna listen to my voice over and over again? But now, like when we played that clip, I was like, well, whatever. That's what I sound like. Anyway, so this is one of my favorite parts, and this is all about collaborating. So obviously making something together, especially with your best friend, is amazing. It's satisfying, it can like completely open your brain to all sorts of new things, but it's also a lot of work. Your collaborator is not just a coworker. It can often be something completely different. You're responsible to each other in a totally different way. It's not like when you go to work and you go to work and it's like a third-party company that you're just like, it's just a completely different thing. Sara and I have a really great relationship and we work extremely well together. This is something that we found out along the way. But we're also responsible to each other and accountable to each other, and it's just a very different level to our relationship, and we kind of had to work through that. We had to figure out how that was going to work. And we realized that our collaboration and our relationship has to be as valuable as the end product, right? So like the joy, we get a lot of joy out of working together and just spending time together and making stuff together. And that has to be as important as the podcast just like existing at all, right? Like as a result of that, it needs to all like be interdependent on each other. And if you don't work on that, it can really fall apart, like in a big way. We can't just be like, we're friends, it'll be fine. Because that just like, it just doesn't work. When you have coworkers, you're sort of responsible to a third party. That's the point. It's just very different when you're like accountable to a friend. So what we have found is that conversations are very crucial, even if they don't seem necessarily productive. It's very unfortunate that like there's no task for feelings, because we have a lot of feelings and we have to like talk through them a lot. And that has been a basis for the show. Like we talk all the time. We have ongoing conversations, and that has actually like filtered into how we run the show and how we architect, what we want to talk about. And we found that we can't shortchange that. We really value it. It's also has really like meant that if something's not working, we have to say something. Like if I'm just like blocked, or if I can't get through something, I have to raise my hand and say, this is not working for me. We have to figure out a different way to do that. And the more we do that, the more, we get over hurdles instead of letting them continue to trip us up. These conversations also just like add to the show's depth, because again, we really like, we value and actually rely on the conversations we have on an ongoing basis to make sure that our conversations sound natural and not like we're just coming to the recording and spending 45 minutes together outside of like a completely different thing. So sort of talking a little bit more about like how we do things and the tasks and what we talk about. Some tasks can totally be divided up, like you can add to your to-do list. Some cannot. We've seen that like planning the show and talking through what we're going to talk about and like how we're going to relate it back to an interview, for example. It just makes more sense for us to do it in person. We have a lot of moments where we're like, oh yeah, like that story makes me think of this. I'm going to talk about that. And it's awesome. And even for the tasks that you can assign that seem like really straightforward and to do, sometimes you're going to realize that like those aren't you can't just take those on by yourself. Sometimes you just rejigger and reprioritize. So in the end, collaboration takes trust more than anything, especially when things get hard, and we have gone through almost everything, I feel like, together, and it's just like, it's been really awesome, and I'm just really proud of the work we've done, and the collaboration part of this whole thing has just been like the best part. So yeah, that's where we are.
I know that one of the things that's been really helpful to me too is like, oftentimes having the partner and the collaborator is the person who's sort of like, okay, I'm really overwhelmed, I have 17,000 things I'm supposed to be doing, and they're like, you don't have to do 15 of those are the only 2 that matter. And having that person that sort of like gets you out of your own brain, whoa, I love it. All right, so we've talked a bunch tonight about sort of how we built, what it looks like. We'd love to answer some questions. So here's what we've got. So we are going to take some questions. While we're answering questions, we will very selfishly pass around our newsletter sign-up sheet. Sign up for our newsletter. If anybody wants to, sorry, no shame. You don't have to. I'm not. Doesn't have to be your jam. But if you'd like to get it, It's gonna come out tomorrow, so we're gonna pass this around while we're doing Q&A. For the Q&A, oh yeah, do we have a pen? Okay. And then while we're doing questions, if you have a question for us, we're gonna hopefully get through a few. We have books to give away to people who ask questions. We're also gonna reserve some books for our last little segment. So I think we can probably take a handful of questions now. Who has a question? All right, we're gonna start with Dave. So doing it first.
I am constantly vexed by trying to figure out how many listeners I actually have. How do you do it?
Great question. Podcast metrics are super shaky. One of the things that we found is that, honestly, like, we recently talked to a woman who leads podcast production at Slate. We talked to a woman who runs a podcast network. And everybody agrees on a few things, which is that, like, it's at least 50% bullshit. So what that means is that, like, the best stuff is usually sticking to things that other people are using if you want to, because most of it is around, like, it depends why you want to know, but if it's like numbers you need to give to some other party, if you're using systems other people are using, then, like, they might be right or wrong, but at least other people will recognize them as, like, valid, whatever that means. We moved to Simplecast. Simplecast analytics seem much more solid so far, based off of both what we found while using it and sort of what we've been hearing from people. PodTrack is another thing you can sign up for. PodTrack is like an add-in, almost like it will plug into some podcast hosts. You can set it up separately. They have additional analytics. I think that Libsyn, I don't know what you're hosted on, but Libsyn is like, because it's one of the older hosts, so many podcasts are on Libsyn. Whatever Libsyn does is sort of expected. A lot of podcasts, we learned this recently, that we're starting to move to the, what's the advertising? IAB standards. So you might want to, podcast hosts are starting to follow IAB standards, International Advertising Board, right? For their listeners. And that means that for a lot of people, it's like certain stuff that used to count doesn't count anymore, like short listens, stuff like that. So that can mean a big change if you go from a host that doesn't have that to one that does. But yeah, so what we're using is Simplecast metrics right now, and we got PodTrack set up as well. But we just launched our first episode with that all set up. So like we're gonna see what the numbers look like now. And then let's see, you had a question earlier too, and then right here. Yes.
I'm curious, I've noticed that when you talk about challenging topics, you do it from a perspective that feels like we're out of the woods and we're sharing the inspiring other side. I don't ever have that feeling of the dramatic, we're not dragged into the dredges of the feelings that you reference, and I'm curious how you came to make choices around that and how much you have to edit out.
Yeah, so basically, like, we don't kind of like bring you to the crisis moment so much, right? Is that what you mean? Yeah. I think for us, we both want to be really sort of like honest about that stuff. So I'm trying to think of a good example for those who haven't listened. So like, something we talked about on the show. I talked about like creepy sexual harassment guy.
Yeah.
Like that could be a lot of people. I think about like there's this example I remember talking about a story. It was like something that happened a few years ago where like this vendor relationship, like I was managing a relationship and he was a creep and he creeped on me at a conference, right? Long story, lots of fun and excitement there. But that's the thing, it's like very much like a thing that happened in the past and like there's some reflection on it. I think that was like less of a direct editorial choice and more indirect in that so much of what we set out to do was to sort of share things that we've learned. And so a lot of it is stuff that we've sort of had some distance to learn from. I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, we invited my therapist on the show.
It was so good.
Which was, yeah, it was great. And while that show sort of centered on like, how do you start therapy? How do you find a therapist? How do you know it's like the right thing for you? I certainly didn't go into the fact that like, I have been in and out of therapy for at least half of my life, and most of the times that I've like started after like not going is because I've been in a very terrible crisis point. So like I haven't talked about that, but I think it's like not necessarily that we don't want to. I think it's we're trying to figure out like where we dig in and how we just make it relevant. Because I think we also want to temper that with like sharing the other side and being like we're getting through it.
And I really think too, so one of the things I noticed when we did that episode is also like you have to decide how, like, we think it's important to be vulnerable on the show, like there's an importance there, but you have to decide like about what and how much is right. And I think that like that doesn't mean that you have to put everything on the table all the time. And so one of like that show, for example, like having Katel bringing her therapist on and just being like, yes, I have a therapist, I'm a person who goes to therapy. That was like a level of vulnerability right there. Versus like we weren't gonna then like delve into like what are the issues Katel actually talks about in her individual therapy sessions, which is like that's a whole other level of vulnerability, which could be appropriate in certain circumstances for certain shows and certain reasons, but that was like that would have been a lot, right? And so I feel like some of it is around that too. It's like deciding, because I mean anytime you're doing something that puts you in public, right, like in the public eye in some way, you have to make decisions about sort of like what you're willing to share and what you want to hold back for yourself. And for us, I think it's like we decided it's important to share a good bit, but that doesn't mean that people get to have anything and everything, you know? So I feel like that's part of it as well. By the way, if you'd like a book, the book's available. If you ask a question, feel free to ask your question if you want to come up and pick a book from the book pile. All right, do we have other questions? Let's see, in the red in the kind of corner there?
Yeah. So when you're collaborating with your best friend, what happens when you guys disagree? Like how do you have hard conversations or resolve disagreements?
You got it? Ask that hard question.
No, honestly, yes, we've had many hard conversations, and I mean, I will truly stand here and say that we have this amazing baseline of trust, and so anytime I have gone to her and said, you know, I don't know if this is working, or like I don't want to do this, or I don't want to talk about this, we have like a really open, kind, caring conversation about it, and I know that that's how it's going to be. So I guess like I don't feel like as nervous. There's definitely been times like, you know, in the last couple months I got really burned out, and I went to her and I was like, I don't know how much stuff I can work on, and I feel really shitty about it, and I feel like I'm letting you down. I feel like I'm disappointing myself. And she was like, let's talk about that, you know? And it was really reassuring. And I think like, again, it really just goes back to that trust. It's like, I just know even if we're gonna disagree about something, we're gonna work it out, and like, because we really value that.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that like, there's room for a lot, right? Like in our relationship, because there's a lot of trust, there is room for us to not see things exactly the same way, or room for us to have, like, for example, different priorities about guests. And like, if you do a weekly show, you can have a lot of people on your show, right? So the kinds of disagreements we have, I feel like are often less disagreements and more just around like people needing to express their individual needs or boundaries or whatever, like around like time or energy or those kinds of things. And I think for that, it's like the tension comes in, or like the sort of like disagreement feeling comes in when you have those stressors and they're not listened to. And then that's when you like turn into sort of there being tension between you. And that, I mean, it's not to say that we might not have, you know, something we disagree about, but I feel like we're both really willing to kind of walk through that and say like, if we're leaning different directions on like which podcast host we're gonna have or whatever, right? We can kind of like walk through that and come out the other end, and just like eventually we're just gonna be like, okay, right? Like it'll be fine. And so I feel like that's really helped. And it's, you know, it's a level of trust that like we are lucky to have, but I also want to say like does not just happen. It's not like we just had this magic relationship. It's like that's like a lot of ongoing giving and feedback that brought us to that place. All right. We have oh gosh, okay. So we have time for 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Susan, I know her.
Oh.
So I mean, I really applaud applaud you guys for the vulnerability of kind of putting yourselves out there. Have you ever dealt with trolls? Like, especially doing a feminist podcast, you know, that's women-centric on social media or in email. Have you encountered that, and how have you handled it?
Not that much, right?
Yeah.
That's
I was really worried. I mean, you know, so far, if one of you goes back home and like, I was actually worried about it, and one of the things that I thought was we were also going to get like more complaints about our voices, because I hear that from so many women who do anything in audio, and it, you know, you get a little like kind of thing here or there, but I felt it's been manageable so far. I don't know what might happen in the future. But I tend to like, I feel like I have a thing where I'm like, okay, I don't want to give it too much space. So I tend to kind of say like, block them, right? Like block them. Don't think twice, just block them. Move on with your life. You have too much to do. And like, you know, like kind of getting myself to that place where I feel like I don't have to respond to every email. So if somebody is not sending something in good faith, like I'm just not going to invest time in it, and try to like teach myself the habit that is hard to do of like not investing emotional space in it either.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've been very lucky. Like that's great. You know, it's been good feedback.
Hope I didn't jinx you.
I know. I'll do that too.
All right, so one more. Okay, you got your minute for a while. Take a question.
What podcast were you listening to that made you say, I can do this, or I want to do this?
Oh my God.
I mean
I don't know that I ever said I can do this. I thought like, I'm going to do this.
Well, we both. I mentioned we both love Call Your Girlfriend. That was sort of a big inspiration for us, because they're two co-hosts and they interview people. And we really like their format. We like their vibe. It was, you know, really felt like something we connected with. We also were really big fans and listeners of Two Dope Queens and Another Round, and you know, I think like shows that really had kind of conversations that you felt like you could be a part of were really inspiring to us. I'm also like real into true crime podcasts, so like, there's that, but I mean, that's not what we do. Sometimes I'm like, maybe we should tell her story.
That space is a little busy. I think the one thing that really also was important for us was like, we really liked the feel of those shows that were like women host driven, and they were personal, and they were talking about their lives, and their friendship was very obvious, right? Like Another Round and Call Your Girlfriend is like so like that. Two Dope Queens is too, even though I don't know, it's much more like comedy focused, and it's a little different format wise, but you see the love between them, and that mattered to us. But what we didn't see in any of those shows was that, plus also like a lot more of the angle of work. Like something like Call Your Girlfriend, they're really focused on sort of like, they go through a lot of the news of the day. So it's a lot of stuff that's like happening politically right now. And that like comes up as sort of, you know, tertiary to what we do. But we tend to talk much more about work relationships and sort of like our relationship to our work. And we felt like that's just not something that those shows were doing as much of. So we thought like, you know, we were inspired by, but also could take it in this other direction.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, and please feel free to come up and get a book. All right, so okay. Are we ready to do this? Okay, so we're almost done. We have one last thing. Oh, yeah, we're good. Okay, so thank you all so much for listening to our presentation, though. I hope that was valuable, I hope that was helpful. If we did not answer your question, feel free to ask us afterwards, or flag us down on social media or whatever, send us an email later. We would be more than happy to talk with you. But we have this segment on the show every week, and it's really fun. It's at the end of every show. We talk about something that we're going to say fuck yeah to this week. And so we do it every week, right? But this is like the first event we're doing this year. Our first episode of the year came out today. So instead, what we want to do is a little segment with all of you that is called actually the fuck yeah of the year. Because part of what we were hoping to do today was like, get people a little bit hyped up to think like, maybe I'm gonna make something this year. Like maybe I wanna like work with a friend this year. All kinds of stuff. And so we're gonna give you a little example. We're gonna model the fuck yeah of the year for you all. And then we're gonna take some volunteers. If you have a fuck yeah, we got, I think we have one more book up here that can go to somebody, right? And then we'll have 5 books left. So I think we can do 5 fuck yeahs. Or we're gonna run out of time. People are gonna be like, I gotta go home. That's what happened last time we did this. We did a live show in Vancouver, and we had a lot of people who wanted to do it. And at some point, we were like, we haven't had dinner yet. Because let me tell you, it's actually like once you start doing it, it's pretty fun. Okay, so get out of here. What else is for you? So, Katel, what's your fuck yeah this year?
Okay, mine is gonna sound really simple, and a lot of times it's like, you know, something that we're just really hyped about, something we started doing, or it's like a person we're really into or like admiring. But again, okay, so mine's gonna sound really simple, but it is phone-free mornings. So I get into the really bad habit of waking up and then literally like reaching over to my bedside table and picking up my phone and being like, and Jen just like instant screen for like 20 minutes, and I'm just like not even taking anything in. So I started trying to do this last year and failed, and so not failed, I just like didn't do it as much. So this year I'm really starting no phones until I get out of bed. It's really simple, but I've already done it like all week, and it's been really, really, really nice. I like wake up and I feel a lot happier, and then I don't like unlock my phone until I'm like, you know, downstairs making coffee. It's really nice.
You're giving yourself permission to have some time for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. My fuck yeah for this year is that we did that listener survey. I mentioned it before, right? And we got so many recommendations for guests that I was like going through and starting to follow people on Twitter, like read their blogs or whatever, right? And I was like, oh, this person's awesome. This person's awesome. So my fuck yeah is like, fuck yeah to finding new awesome women doing cool shit, because there's a lot of them and I know a lot already, but like, man, I needed more. There's one of the recommendations we even are going to feature in the newsletter tomorrow, because we started looking at her site and we were cracking up and also learning things. So already we were like, this is already like good for us. So fuck yeah to that.
Yeah, fuck yeah.
All right, so who's got a fuck yeah of the year? Oh, we got some hands. Okay, we got the first hand right here. I'm gonna hand you this mic. What's your name?
Jess.
Jess, yes, you told me earlier. Okay. Hey Jess, what's your fuck yeah this year? Yeah.
So my fuck yeah for the year is daily tarot draws. Specifically using the Mystic Mondays app. It's fantastic, it's free. She's from Philly, which is sick, like the person who made it. The reason it's my fuck yeah though is because my best friend, I moved here 2 years ago, and my best friend had a baby a little more than a year ago. And I realized when I went to send her a Mother's Day card that my last text message was congratulations on your baby, like 7 months before that. I was like, best friend, interesting. And so I had posted one of my daily draws on Instagram, like on my Instagram story. She was like, yo, what's that? And now we take screenshots of our daily draws from this app, which if you don't know tarot or daily draws, it's just sort of like a thing to think about for the day. And we tell each other like, hey, this thing reminded me of this thing that's happening in my life. And just by doing that, you know, she's thousands of miles away, we're both super busy, but we know each other so much closer now and we know ourselves so much better because we're doing this little like tiny self-analysis every single day, and it's on a free app and it's super fun.
Oh, I love that.
What's the name of the app again?
Mystic Mondays.
Thank you.
Mystic Mondays. All right, who else had one? I saw other hands. Yeah. All right, yeah. Don't be shy.
Hi, my fuck yeah this year is that I'm finally starting my own podcast. It's called Beyond UX, and it is about the ethical implications of the decisions that UX designers make, and all about remembering the human on the other side of the things that you create, for better or for worse. And I'm so excited to finally have my first episode recorded and then editing it this weekend. What's it called?
Beyond UX. You can hear it. Everybody, check it out. All right. When's it gonna go live?
Monday.
Oh, on Monday. Okay, you're editing this weekend. You're gonna go live Monday. Believe in you. All right. We got one here. Pam, what's your fuck yeah this year?
Hi, I guess I'll stand. So I've gone through a lot of changes in the last year or so, but I have really great friends, and the thing that's really made a difference really this week is the concept of paying yourself before paying everyone else. And that just blew my mind. It's still blowing my mind. But I also think of it as like nurture yourself before nurturing others. So it's just sort of been, just really been sitting with me. So yeah, fuck yeah.
Yeah, fuck yeah. She saved so much money this year. All right, how many, you get a couple, room for a couple?
Yeah.
Who else has a fuck yeah? No other fuck yes? Oh, we got one over here. Hey, Nicole. Nicole, tell us, what is your fuck yeah this year?
I'm going to be dedicating it right now. My fuck yeah of this year is to organize and participate on the panels that I've been thinking about and talking to people about. And I think people are nodding their heads like, yes, we've heard you say that. So I'm putting my mind to it and getting rid of the fear of hearing my own voice and those trolls on the web and just going for it, doing it. That's it.
Fuck yeah. You know, I will say this. I mean, it takes a while, but you do become entirely desensitized to your own voice. You just have to listen to yourself.
Earmuffs?
I just, you just at some point, you just don't care.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not going to tell you how many hours that'll take, but at some point, you just don't care. All right, do we have any others? Anybody else have a fuck yeah for the, send us out into this very dark winter night? All right, oh, we got one in the back. I'm going to come back to you.
What's up, everybody? I think my fuck yeah this year is I kind of like rewrite my own like rules a little bit this year. Like I feel like I'm always feeling guilty. Like I didn't go to the gym, or I didn't go do this thing, or I did do something and I feel guilty about it. And I just like don't want to feel guilty for everything anymore. Like I just want to like own it and do it and like I did that thing and like that's what's up. And I don't know, I just want to like enjoy and own like the decisions I've done and made and like learn from them, but also like build off them and just like rock it. I don't know. I just don't want like a guilt-free life, within reason, of course. You know, like. But yeah, I think like rewriting my own rules and then just like running with it and like enjoying things to like a whole different level. So yeah.
I was just thinking about this today because the episode released today. You listen to it. Heather Habrolewski was the guest. She talks about exactly that and the sort of like shame cycles you get into, and she talks about sort of like treating yourself like, oh, I'm such a dummy, I can't even get the dishwasher unloaded on time, like that kind of stuff, and breaking out of that cycle. So like, yeah, hell yeah. All right, Aurora, you ready? What's your fuck yeah, Aurora?
My fuck yeah is really going into that really deep, uncomfortable space and partnering with two girlfriends to launch 10,000 white women connected to their women of color, their sisters of color. And we're gonna go deep and we're gonna go raw, and it's gonna be really, really hard work. But we're launching an event next week, and we're all terrified and unbelievably scared, but fuck yeah, we're gonna do it.
Well, not necessarily about the 10,000 white women themselves, but I want to hear more about what you're doing. Okay. Do we have a couple books? You can pick a book if you'd like. We have one last book to give away. Does anybody else have a final one for us? No takers, going once, going twice. All right, it's fine. Yeah, we'll leave it here. Thank you all so much for participating. I hope that was fun for you. One of the things that we found was that like just doing this kind of thing together, I think it's really exciting. I love hearing what people are excited about. I'm actually excited about everything I heard people say. So we like to get excited. Thank you all for coming out tonight. If you'd like to get in touch with us, if you have questions, etc., you can find us at any of these places. Email us info@strongfeelings.co if we didn't answer something you really want to talk about, or if you want to send us nasty messages. If it's the latter, please don't. I will find you. And you can even leave us a voicemail. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming tonight.